They're paying off student loans, they're buying a practice, maybe they're buying a house. But if they're doing it right, they do have good cash flow. So I've just tried to lower the bar a little bit in terms of building in a subscription model that comes alongside of that, so I can get further upstream or downstream and help dentists who want help earlier in their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Raving Patients podcast, sponsored by the Doc Sites and Cloud Dentistry. Check out and listen to the commercials I read over the next 35 minutes. My name is Dr. Len Tao, and I'm really excited today. We're going to be talking to Shawn Terrell about how to make practice optional. He is with a company called Dentist Exit Planning. And some of the topics we're going to be talking about today are what are the big things that often impede financial success for dentists, and how financial planning and treatment planning are related, and many, many more things. So stay tuned to a great episode. So Shawn, welcome to the Raving Patients podcast.
Dr. Len, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and great to return the favor and be a guest on your podcast. Thank you.
And for those that don't know, I was a guest that will be released in the end of July, I think it is, or sometime in July, on his podcast called Dentists, Puns, and Money. So stay tuned for an episode where I appeared on his podcast. So Shawn, for those that don't know who you are, and as we had discussed in a previous time, part of what I do is I want to help get people known through this podcast is the fact that a lot of people probably don't know who you are. So I want you to use this as a forum to tell dentists what you do and how you do it. So why don't you just give a little brief bio, a brief introduction about who you are and what you do?
So, I have been in the financial services industry since 2011. And I started out working with one of the bigger insurance companies in the United States. And as a result, a lot of my expertise early on in the industry was around insurance products, and did that for about 10 years. And from there, my practice started to involve working with a lot of dentists, helping them understand and how to implement really strong disability insurance, which is, as most dentists know, that's something that's usually important to most dentists. And then from there, I just kept working with more and more dentists and kept getting asked about more and more financial topics, and sort of expanded from there to try to encompass a broader area of comprehensive financial planning for dentists specifically. After 10 years being with the insurance company, in 2021, I launched my own independent firm, Dentist Exit Planning, and I'm as we record this, about a year into that. So that's just a brief background on kind of where I've been and where I am today.
So just to give a dentist an understanding of what you do, you create comprehensive financial plans for dentists. And why am I asking that? Because there's so many different companies out there. There's so many people out there that do a number of different things. As you know, and the listeners know, I recently sold my dental practice. I was able to do that because my financial planner and I planned very well. And literally, I told my wife when I hit certain goals, and certain financial goals, obviously, investment goals and some other things, that I would sell my practice and stop doing dentistry. And I'm able to do that because the financial planner and I did things very well. And we were, I don't want to say lucky, but he created a very comprehensive plan for me that we stuck by to basically put my money where we needed it to be put. So, and that's similar to what you do. You do comprehensive financial planning for dentists.
Yeah, and that's, I probably broke my own rule by using that term, because comprehensive financial planning probably means different things to different people depending on what they come to the table with in terms of their experience and what their paradigms are with. Maybe a different way to explain it is I use the term make practice optional a lot. And what I mean by that is, every dentist comes out of dental school and they enjoy practicing dentistry, and they have to practice dentistry, right? Because they've taken out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans in most cases to become a dentist. Oftentimes they buy a practice, they buy a house, they start a family. So practice is not optional early in a dentist's career. They have to do it, or the other option is bankruptcy. But at a certain point, if they do things well and they plan well, in the future, they build up enough assets alongside their dental practice and in other places that they can eventually replace or replicate the cash flow that they made from actively practicing, and then have the option, if they choose to leave practice. Now, that doesn't mean that people have to retire the day that they become sort of financially independent from actively practicing, But I think the goal for most people should be to get to that point where they could walk away if they wanted to. A number of dentists will say that they want to practice into their 70s just because they love it so much. They love being a mentor. Maybe they want to practice with their kids if they go into the industry and help them get started. But the big objective is just to get to a point where you have financial resources that you can still live the life that you want to live without actively having to see patients on a daily basis.
And that's interesting because, many should know my story. I don't know how much you know about it, but bought a practice in 2007 where I was $14,000 in debt after refinancing my loans. But that's a big nut to have for my practice, $14,000 before you even open the doors for that particular month. But I gutted the building. I, bought the building, spent lots of money renovating the building, and I was heavily in debt. And I made a choice to pay it off in 7 years very aggressively. But I also was very good at putting money away into certain spots, but I also spent money as well. So there's a couple of questions I have since we spoke. I'm curious about a couple of them in a little bit. But when I tell dentists that I'm 48 years old and stop dentistry or stopping practice, and by the end of this year in 2022, I won't be doing dentistry anymore. I'll be clinically retired. You dentists look at me very enviously. And I think that dentists want to try to get out of clinical practice as early as they can. They don't want to be practicing. And I've met dentists who are practicing and they're in their 80s and they're still practicing. Dentistry is a very stressful career. They're spending a lot of money in loans. They have a lot of loans coming out of college and undergraduate. And I'm very open about the fact that my parents paid for my schooling, but I've worked for everything else I've ever gotten except my schooling. So let's start with a couple of questions that we had planned to talk about, which are, what are the big things that often impede financial success for dentists? And I think that's really important to go over here because, dentists make a nice living if they know how to run a practice. But there's a lot of things that can prevent them from really, bathing in that financial success, I guess would be a good way of describing it. So what are the big things that dentists often impede financial success for dentists?
So the big one that always jumps out to me, or that is top of mind for me with that question, is not really specific to dentists at all. It's specific to human beings. And the answer is behavior, or bad behavior, or not really understanding what good behavior is. And to give a couple specific examples of that. So making rash decisions in the face of pressure can often put people in a bad position financially, and then just not understanding, how much do you really need to save? How should you think about debt? What's an appropriate lifestyle to live based on the income that you earn and when you eventually want to be independent from active practice? So behavior is a really big one, and that's not specific to dentists necessarily. The other thing is, I think this comes into play sometimes, is not understanding when to ask for help from other qualified professionals. One of the other topics I mentioned we would talk about today is, how you can eventually, or how you can actually sometimes be successful if you're a do-it-yourself dentist who wants to do their own financial planning. That can work out, but I think it's important for a lot of dentists to understand that they will probably need help at some point along the way to reach that point. So those are a couple of the big things that jump out to me about that question. What impedes financial success for dentists is making poor decisions or behavior, and then not understanding when to ask for help from qualified professionals.
I would say living beyond your means would be a good way to describe what you just described. So I literally yesterday, knowing that we were recording this today, I read a post on one of the Facebook groups, and I'm going to read you this because I'm curious. Right away, I'm shaking my head. So it says, I have a dilemma. Please give me your valuable suggestions. I can't decide which one to go with, a home or an office. Me and my wife want to buy a home. We've had several expectations of our dream home. We've been looking for several years. We didn't find one, even searching not now for 6 years. Now we found one. We are excited because of inflation. Prices have gone up, and we end up with monthly payments for a $1 million mortgage, which is huge, around $10,000 EMI. Now my dilemma is we have a mortgage for $1 million. I will not be approved for a dental office loan. Then opening my office will get delayed. If I stop buying the home now, not sure we will find another one, and the prices may further go up. Even if we wait for interest rates to go down after 2 years, houses pricing may go up. What would you do in this case? Open an office or buy a house? I mean,
So the office sounds like the better return on investment long term, but
100%. So I don't even know why there's the question of thought here. $1 million mortgage for $10,000 a month, and you don't have an office you want to open yet. Something doesn't smell right there.
right. But this raises a larger point, and I probably even should have mentioned this or started there a little bit earlier. Is when I do planning with dentists, the first place I start, or I try to get people to start, is what do you actually want out of your life? What does that look like, and how does money intersect with that? So if you place a really high value on being at home and entertaining and just doing everything within your house, then maybe that's really important to people. But in terms of just like a black and white financial decision, buying the practice or buying a good dental practice sounds like a better financial decision to me long term. But there's caveats to everything. I guess if it's on Long Island and it appreciates by 10% every year, I don't know, maybe the house is a better investment. But if you're a dentist, I think buying a practice probably in most cases is going to be the smarter decision.
Well, it's very funny because I actually bought a practice before I bought a house before I bought my practice. But I was working as an associate in a practice. And when I bought my house, I didn't realize I was going to have the practice was going to become available. So I bought my home first, was working as the associate, making a very good living. And then that was in April 2005. And I bought my practice in March of 2007. So I had no real, I don't want to say goal, but I did not know a practice would become available that soon. But this guy says he can't buy a practice. I bought a practice and still bought a home. So it didn't affect me like that. So that was just something that really, I was curious what your thoughts would be. But my opinion, you buy a home as well. You buy a practice as well. So we covered the two things that you think often impede dentists' success, financial success for dentists. Next thing we wanted to talk about was how are financial planning and treatment planning related? Because obviously one is for a dentist, one is for you.
Sure. So, and this is where I want to make sure that I have it right in terms of clinical dentistry. And so you tell me if I've sort of got the treatment planning right, but just really high level in general, if I go to a dentist for the first time, I'm going to fill out an intake form either online or when I get to the office in the waiting room. The hygienist or the assistant's going to ask me a few questions about, what's my, if I'm having any pain or what my, the problem that I'm having when I come in there, what the problem presents itself. They're going to take some x-rays, and the dentist is going to ask me a few questions as well. So you take all that information from the physical exam, the x-rays, and you try to combine it into, how to fix whatever problems is going on. And then, you present the patient with options, right? Like you could do A, B, and C. This is what they look like in terms of time. This is what they look like in terms of costs. And here's what I would do if I were you, or if you were my dad, or if you were my brother, whatever. Is that really high level? Is that a general sense of treatment planning from your perspective?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I just try to approach it the same way when it comes to financial planning. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. How does money intersect with your life? What's really important to you? Do you want to have kids? Do you not want to have kids? How big of a house do you want to have? Is it important for you to take lots of nice vacations every year? Is it important for you to drive new Escalades every other year? All those things factor in. How soon would you like to be financially independent from actively practicing? What does retirement look like for you? Do you want to leave a legacy? All those things sort of factor in. So it's my job to really ask a lot of questions, get to the heart of what's really important to a client, and then kind of pair that with what their financial data actually says, like how much have they saved? How much are they saving? What are their investments in? What's their insurance look like? And sort of try to meld those things together and say, okay, here's where the problem areas are. Here's how we could move towards financial independence in a more efficient or a better way. And here's some of the first steps to get there. And then with me, the thing that I try to always get better at as I've moved along in my career is just really making that into bite-sized pieces for my clients, because maybe you can relate when you look at a patient. A lot of times sometimes there's more than one thing wrong at a time, and you can give them too much too soon and they end up not doing anything, right? So sort of with that as an analogy, that's how I think about treatment planning, and financial planning is similar in a lot of ways.
And I agree with you. When you said you give them too many options and do nothing at all, you confuse the hell out of them. I try to keep things as simple as possible. This is priority number one. This is priority number two. This is the final priority. We're going to work on priority number one first, and give them a clear path to understand exactly what needs to be done.
Yep. And that's tricky sometimes, right? Though, because the patient, if it's a dental patient, they might want, the perfect white smile right away. And what as the dentist is like, well, you got a couple bombed out molars we got to take care of here first, right? And that happens to me too. People will come in asking me about how to save more in taxes and do Roth conversions and backdoor Roth. And I'm like, that stuff's important and that's all efficient, or a better way to be efficient long term. But we've first got to establish really good savings habits, just saving X number of dollars every month. And then we can figure out where the best place to put it is after we've built that habit.
I think that's awesome. So next thing we wanted to talk about was how can dentists have a successful outcome with do-it-yourself financial planning? I use an expert, like I said. I never want to do this stuff by myself or do it yourself. So I'm curious, how can dentists do it successfully if they try to do it versus what do you feel are the big advantages to using someone like yourself?
Yeah, and it comes down to personal preference, right? So I always use an analogy with my house when I talk about this one, because I bought the house that I currently live in 2011. It was built in 2011. I bought it 5 years later in 2016. And it was a builder home. I think the person that built our house built the 100 houses in our subdivision. And, housing contractors work on margin just like any other business. So most builder homes don't have the nicest garage doors, the nicest garbage disposals, the nicest water heaters. They're good, but they're not great. So this is a long windup to me saying a lot of things in my house started wearing out after we lived here 5 or 6 years, once the house was 9 or 10 years old. And water heater, garage door, garbage disposal. So where I'm going with this analogy is anytime if you have any sort of do-it-yourself or DIY bone in your body, for me, the judgment is always how far can you go down the rabbit hole of trying to investigate what might be wrong to determine if you can do it yourself and fix it yourself without calling in a professional, versus when do you know that you're over your head and it's just going to be a lot better in terms of time, money, and then sometimes danger too, right? Before you should call somebody else in. So to continue with the analogy, my garage door broke, the torsion springs gave out. I looked online and saw that, a lot of people have lost limbs trying to fix their garage doors in the springs there, and that you need special tools to get it. So that one was like, okay, immediately just call a professional and then have them do it. My stove, the circuit went out on that. I replaced the heating element. I put a new circuit in the back. And that was an example of I did actually figure out how to do it myself, but I had to go buy a whole bunch of tools. And it took me an enormous amount of time. I did fix it, but in the end, my time might have been better spent actually doing what I do well to earn a living. My water heater broke. There you're dealing with electricity, gas, and water. So a lot of things can go wrong. So with all those things, it's always this decision of how soon is too soon to call in a professional. And I think there's a big spectrum with dentists, right? So some dentists are going to look at financial planning, broadly speaking, and realize, I know it's important. I know that I don't have a huge interest in being good at it, and I would rather just outsource that right away to someone I trust who can help me get to a place of financial independence as quickly as possible. Other people are going to try to go it alone for a little while by themselves and try to figure some of that out before recognizing that, okay, I'm getting a little bit older here. Some of the easy, low-hanging fruit things I know that I needed to do have now been done by me. And things are getting a little bit more real. I'm in my 30s and 40s now, and I really want to make sure that I'm on pace to be independent from practice as soon as I can. Those people are going to realize that, okay, now is the time to call in a professional a little bit later down the road. And then you have people that will try to take it all the way to the end on themselves. So the people that I work with are the people that figure out, I don't have any interest in doing it, and I'd rather just work with a professional. Or they've done some of it themselves, but realize that the stakes are just getting too high. And then the other kind of profile of the client that I work with, that's sort of the non-DIYer, is they could do it themselves, but they recognize that their time and their energy is better spent doing things and being with people that they care about, right? Or seeing patients, right? So they realize the trade-off there. I guess the point is that there's people that are going to outsource. There's people going to try to figure it all out themselves. But dentists can figure it out for themselves if they have the interest, if they have the time and the energy to do it, and they're okay with, realizing that there's a few potholes out there that might derail them if they don't know what they don't, if they don't realize they don't know what they don't know. So that was a long-winded answer. There was some analogies in there about housing and building houses, but hopefully that some of that resonates with the people listening.
I love analogies. I think that was a great analogy. I understood exactly what you were saying. And I always look at a project the same way. I'm not the most handy, but I know how to do certain things, and those things I know how to do, I do. But a lot of the times I'm going to say this isn't worth my time or effort or a risk of injury. and I have someone else do it. So I agree 100% with that analogy. Um, let's move on to something else. Let's talk about diversification on more than just investment holdings. So we have diversity on liquidity of assets, diversity of taxation of assets, and diversity on risk of assets. So what can you talk about there?
So for every dentist to eventually be independent from active practice, they have to build other assets that can produce cash flow eventually, right? And that means taking a little bit of what they make right now from practicing dentistry and not spending it and setting it aside to build those eventual cash flow producing assets. So when people do that, my experience is they think about those assets that they're building mostly in one way, and that is what's the rate of return or the eventual rate of return long term on that asset. And rate of return is a really important consideration when you're trying to build assets outside of dentistry. But where it can get a little tricky is that it's not the only consideration that most people should have as they think about where to put their money outside of practice. And so by diversification, I mean, we should look at rate of return and what the expectation is there, but we should also look at if we're saving money somewhere, how liquid is it? Like if we needed to get that money back in a hurry, in like less than a week or something, could we get our hands on it? And if we could get our hands on it, would there be any taxation or penalties associated with it? Risk, how safe is it? Like if we're putting it somewhere, obviously we're putting it somewhere for a rate of return, but is there any chance that we don't get it all back or we don't get any of it back? There's certain assets or certain investments out there that's a distinct possibility. And then the taxes as well, right? So you can, when you put money into different assets, those are going to be taxed different ways, both along the way while you're saving during your working years, and then also upon distribution when you eventually try to produce cash flow off those assets. So I'm someone that believes in sort of a balanced approach, like having, different investments that have different profiles in risk, that have different profiles in liquidity, that have different profiles in taxation, just so you sort of have all of your bases covered and are in a position that you have more than one option along the way, and then also in retirement, so to speak, or distribution.
I think that was great. I have two questions related to this. One is something we briefly talked about, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. My son, who's 15, I've basically maxed out his 529 plan, where I think we're going to have money left over. I don't think he's going to need as much money as I have put in there for him. So my financial advisor has recommended, doing some whole life plans to allow the money to be easily accessible, rather than put it into something that I have a lot of restrictions on. So what are your thoughts on that? That way to put money away and not direct it directly to the 529?
Sure. So a couple thoughts. One, whole life insurance is a polarizing topic in the financial services industry, both among professionals and then also among consumers. If you talk to very many dentists, you probably wouldn't have to talk to very many dentists for one of them to say that they had a negative experience with someone who was pushing whole life insurance at them as an investment vehicle. So just like there probably are polarizing topics within dentistry among dentists, that's definitely a big one within the financial services industry. So with that qualifier out of the way, I'm someone that does believe that a specific type of whole life insurance can be a good lever to use as an option in certain situations. Where it gets a bad rap is insurance salesmen trying to use it for all things to all people at all times. Like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's probably why a specific type of whole life insurance gets a bad name. But back to your specific example. So there's trade-offs with all these things in terms of where you put money. And with education planning, one of the nice benefits of 529 plans, broadly speaking, is that there's some tax advantages oftentimes to putting money aside for your children's education and putting them inside 529 plans. The trade-off there is that, and I haven't read the regulations in the last week or so, but just broadly speaking, those funds can only be used for education-related purposes, broadly speaking. So what I hear you saying is that you have a good amount of money in the 529 plan that you think the money that's there sort of is almost in the neighborhood of exceeding what's going to be needed for your son's education at some point down the road. And rather than pay the taxes and penalty to use it for something else, you're starting to think about putting money in other places, i.e. a specific type of whole life insurance that can be used as an investment vehicle.
Correct. That's 100%
Okay.
correct.
Yep. And so without knowing all the specific circumstances, that is a viable option. And it's one that I have used for my own children as well. And there's also things called UPMAs and UGMAs, which are different types of accounts where you relinquish some of the control, more of the control on the money that's set aside there, but it has less of the restrictions of the 529, i.e., it doesn't have to be used for education purposes. But those are just a couple different examples of how, it's never just one thing. It's usually a balance of things, then it becomes circumstantial for the client and their family.
And you called it UPMOs, and what was the other one?
UPMA, which is an acronym for, I'm putting myself on the spot here, Uniform Transfer Gift to Minors and Uniform. It's an UPMA and an UGMA, UGMA and UTMA. And there's probably financial people that are in the financial services interest listening right now that are like, this guy's an idiot, he can't remember the acronym, but
it's
I'm just
UGMA
blanking
and
on it.
UGMA and UPMA. That's what it stands. UGMA
Yeah.
and UPMA. Got it.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And then one other thing I want to ask you about, and we didn't discuss it, is Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is a very big. Right now I know Bitcoin's dropped significantly. I saw it was down in the mid to high 20,000s. What is your feeling when someone says they want to put money into Bitcoin or to cryptocurrency in general?
So I'm still formulating my stance and my philosophy on cryptocurrency. I guess where I'm at with it currently as we record this is that it is a thing. And, just like anything, to me, it seems like more on the speculative scale. So like you do an oil and gas fund or something where, you might have put a lot of money in and you might not get very much money back. So as long as people understand the risk and the reward and the trade-off there, then if people want to put a smaller percentage of their money there, I'm okay with it as it sits here today, and as we record this in June of 2022. But I'm not any sort of cryptocurrency expert at this point. But to your point, that's something I have explored making part of my offering, just because I know it's a hot topic right now, and anecdotally speaking, there's a lot of dentists that are interested in cryptocurrency.
Yes, there is, and I guess the thing I've been told is, as long as you know that you could potentially lose the money, and if you're okay losing the money, then it's okay to risk the money. But if you can't lose the money, don't put the money into crypto. That's really what I've been told many times. So, I'm not a crypto expert either. I'm learning it. I'm looking to probably invest some money in there. But I saw that. I mean, I was looking at Bitcoin when it was in the 40s and the 50s. Now it's in the 20s. I'm like, thank God I didn't put my money into that quite then. So, interesting take. And last thing I want to talk to you about before we get into the Q&A part of the lightning round is and we discussed this again, talk to me about how your compensation compares to the traditional compensation model that some other financial advisors have, because you do things a little bit differently. You have a little bit of a niche there. So.
Yep. So I work only with dentists. That's my specific niche. I'll probably drill down even further and get into specific specialties and specific other areas at some point in the future, but I'm not there yet. But I think there's just a lack of transparency and a lack of understanding as it relates to the financial services industry, my industry, in terms of how people are compensated and what the different compensation models are. So one of the standard compensation models in my industry is what's called assets under management compensation, or AUM. And that's just where, like let's say you have $1 million, standard would be for an advisor to charge 1% on that $1 million that's under his management. And then so that advisor makes $10,000 per year off that account. Where it gets a little bit tricky is what's included in exchange for that fee. Is it just investment management, or does it encompass all other areas of financial planning that are included? At the other end of the spectrum is, just the flat fee model, which is where you're charging someone per engagement or on an ongoing subscription or retainer basis. And what's being delivered in exchange for that has to be clearly outlined in that example as well. And then the third, probably most common example, is on the insurance side of things. If you purchase an insurance product as a consumer, whether it's life insurance or disability insurance or some type of annuity, oftentimes there's a commission built in that the agent will receive in that instance. But you've got all these people out there, 300,000 or 400,000 people in the United States calling themselves financial advisors. They're all licensed and credentialed different ways, and they're all receiving compensation different ways. And some of them are good actors and some of them are bad actors. And some of the bad actors give the good actors a bad name. To your point, what I've found to be the fairest compensation model for me to date is to sort of do a hybrid model where I'm charging the dentist that I work with a flat monthly fee for the comprehensive financial planning. And then I'm also charging them a percentage of assets under my management. With the caveat is I'm not charging them the full freight 1% for those AUMs. And then I also, at this time, and I want to timestamp this, I'm capping the maximum that I'll charge in terms of the assets under my management. That's the part of the industry that I've just never been able to understand is if you're on the AUM model, how can you justify charging someone who has $500,000 1%? And then, someone has $5 million. Well, those are two big differences. Are you really delivering way more value for the $5 million account as you are for the $500,000 account? Because there's a pretty big disparity oftentimes in terms of the compensation that's received. And there's a sliding scale oftentimes with advisors in terms of like you're over certain break points of assets under management, the fees go down after that break point. But my idea was a lot of dentists don't have a lot of assets under their management the first 10 or 15 years of their career, right? Because they're paying off student loans, they're buying a practice, maybe they're buying a house. But if they're doing it right, they do have good cash flow. So I've just tried to lower the bar a little bit in terms of building in a subscription model that comes alongside of that so I can get further upstream or downstream and help dentists who want help earlier in their careers before they're 50 years old and have $1 million or $2 million in their account.
Gotcha. That was really good information. Thank you for explaining that. I want to switch gears now. I want to hit the lightning round part of our podcast. It's a fun section for me. I'm going to ask you some business questions. As you know, lightning round, real fast answers. And then we'll get to how people can contact you and learn more about how they can reach out to you to get more information of what you can do for them. So first question, what mindsets helped you make you successful?
Just get rid of the idea that failure is a bad thing. You never fail unless you stop trying. If something doesn't work, you just iterate and find a new path.
Okay. What have you given up on that you wish you never have?
Playing the drums. I was a drummer and I still like drumming. And I sort of wish that I had an avenue to play the drums once in a while in a pickup band or something like a jam session here and there.
Okay. Have you ever turned down a client?
Yes.
And have you ever fired a client?
Not directly. You sort of let them. Sometimes things take care of themselves.
Hey, I understand that.
Let them go away quietly.
What is your favorite aspect of owning your own business?
Oh, total autonomy. I love being my own boss. I always tell myself that, having the option to do what I do when I want to do it is my favorite thing. Once you have that, you can't go back.
Agree 100%. Which 3 adjectives describe your strengths?
Forthright, straight shooter. I don't know if that's an adjective. Funny.
Hey, they work.
Wit, sense of humor.
Okay. What is one thing that doesn't add value to your life, but you still do it?
Oh, boy. Twitter on some level. I learn good things from Twitter, but I also probably waste too much time scrolling Twitter.
That's funny. What methods do you use to keep focused?
I use a meditation app called 10% Happier. That's helped me on some level. And then exercise. I'm a big proponent that sometimes working less is actually better, and getting out for a walk or a bike ride or to lift some weights at the gym will actually some subtraction of work and some addition of exercise and movement is actually a better overall life.
Okay. And last question. If you had the chance to start your career over again, what would you do differently?
I would have launched my own independent firm and done it my way much sooner, which is probably not an uncommon take for business owners. Like, I just should have leapt sooner.
And I'll give you one more question. What business book have you read multiple times that you highly recommend?
Who Not How, which was sort of written with Dan Sullivan, who's the strategic coach guy. And then Never Split the Difference by, I think, Chris Voss, who is an FBI negotiator. Those are a couple books that are top of mind that are just ways to think about running a business and ways to communicate in better ways.
Perfect answers. Thank you so much. So, Shawn, why don't you let people know how to reach out to you, how they can get more information about what you can do for them, the best way to do that?
Yep. So I think the best way to find me is just on my website, which is dentistexit.com. And from there, you can go to my podcast page, or if you're on my main page for, I think, more than 15 seconds, the newsletter sign up pops up. But like, get it. I get it. I'm looking for an intimate relationship and a long-term relationship with dentists. You don't go from like zero to that overnight. So for people that just are interested in getting to know me a little bit more, probably listening to my podcast and getting my newsletter about my podcast is the best way to sort of, in a non-threatening, indirect way, get to know a little bit more about me and my practice easier, just to sort of dip their toe into things. So sign up for my newsletter, dentistexit.com.
Okay. Well, Shawn, this was great. Thank you so much for joining me today on this Raving Patients podcast. Guys, if you like the episode, please share it. Please recommend your colleagues download it, subscribe to it. As I mentioned before, review us. That's very, very important on the reviews, guys. So take time to review us. Check out the books on Amazon that you can find, Raving Patients and 100 Tips to Getting 100 Reviews in 100 Days. Check those out if you want. If you have any questions for me, you know how to reach out to me. And thanks once again for joining me, Shawn. It was a blast. Thank you so much today. And we'll talk to everybody soon.